Hello, this is David Bernstein, founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. Welcome to this edition of the SpeechCast, a joint endeavor of the JILV and the Speech Project of the Jewish Journal. I've been very much looking forward to this episode. One of my intellectual heroes, Jonathan Rauch, is our special guest. Jonathan, I'm really honored that you've agreed to join us on the publication of your new excellent book, The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. I've gotten through 6 of 8 chapters. I'm going to be honest with you. But I'm going on vacation tomorrow, so I have my plane ride full of Jonathan Rauch. So I'm really excited to listen to the next 2 chapters. Anyway, you are an author, you're a journalist, you're a thought leader, a senior fellow at Brookings Institute. You're correct me if I'm wrong, an atheistic Jewish homosexual. That's how you describe yourself, or they described you in Wikipedia. So
sometimes a homosexual Jewish atheist.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I usually start these podcasts off by asking the person I'm interviewing, what do you make of the current ideological moment? But I'm actually going to switch it up with you and ask you, what do you think of the current epistemic moment?
I think it's pretty fraught. I'm pretty worried. The book makes 3 big claims. Number 1 is we have a constitution of knowledge and we better understand it and defend it, because big claim number 2, you're being manipulated right now. There's some very powerful people using very sophisticated tactics like canceling and mass disinformation to undermine the system that we rely on to tell truth from fiction and facts from falsehood. The third is that we're not 10 feet tall. I'm sorry, they're not 10 feet tall. We are, but only if we get our act together. And right now, I think our side, the liberal side, is on the run.
So you start off the book by talking about Donald Trump's assault on truth. And you characterize what is emanating from the right, and you characterize what's emanating from the left. Do you see them as mirror images of each other, or are they actually different? Are we seeing different phenomena, both of which may be assaults on liberalism coming from the 2 sides of the political spectrum?
Well, the answer to that would be yes. They're similar in important ways, and they're different in important ways. So first, the similarity. There's this thing called, specialists call it information warfare, also known as propaganda. I call it epistemic warfare, because the goal of this thing, the big overarching goal, is to organize and manipulate the social and media environments for political gain, specifically in order to divide, dominate, disorient, and ultimately demoralize the target population. And there are lots of ways to do that, but they rely on things like conspiracy theories, what's known as a Russian pioneered tactic called the fire hose of falsehood, which is when you say so many mistruths so quickly through so many channels, no one can keep up, everyone gets confused. Conspiracy bootstrapping, it's where you cite conspiracy theories, and then you say, if no one's disproved it, it might be true, or if they have disproved it, that just proves the conspiracy. And then there's what's become known as cancel it. That's a new term. It wasn't around when I started the book, but that's a form of social coercion that uses all kinds of social pressure to isolate people, shame them, destroy their reputations, demolish their professional careers, cost them their job, make them feel terrible about themselves if they dissent from whatever is the view that the counselors are trying to impose. So all of these things have a common goal, and that's to manipulate the information environment for political gain, as opposed to actually trying to figure out what's true in a detached liberal style. What's different about them is that the primary users of canceling right now are on the left, because they have the cultural power to do it, and the primary users of disinformation are on the right, because they have the social networks and the power to do it. And above all, they have Donald Trump, who is the greatest propaganda genius since the 1930s. So they're doing different things, but with similar goals, and of course, to different ends.
Some have suggested that what you're seeing on the left is a much more articulated ideology than you have on the right. That's what also might make a difference, different other than just the tactics that you talked about. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do. What's going on the left has an ideology that traces back, maybe to the 70s, starting with things like postmodernism and subjectivism and other isms, on which I'm not a super expert. And then you get an additional layer of illiberalism, anti-pluralism that comes in more recently from things like emotional safetyism, which is the idea that if you criticize me and it hurts my feelings in some way, you've committed an act of violence. Mm-hmm. And that turns science itself into a human rights violation, because the whole process of scientific exchange is about criticism. So yeah, the left is more ideological in that sense. Right now, the right is more opportunistic. Trump and his MAGA movement and his Republican helpers and his conservative media helpers are really more like Putin. I think they're mostly just interested in power and profit for themselves, getting ahead in the world. But that doesn't make them a whit less dangerous. In some ways, it makes them more dangerous because ideologically, they're incredibly flexible. They can say one thing one day and another thing the next, or all things all at once. Whatever works to gin up their machine.
So I've had the chance to hear you talk about the book on a couple podcasts recently, Andrew Sullivan, Yashka Monk, among others. And they're great people, and I know you're generally simpatico with them, but I was struck by some of the differences of opinion that emerged during those discussions. I think in both those podcasts, and it was sort of one around optimism versus pessimism, and I would characterize the one with Andrew as a difference, and I think actually Yashka as well, as difference about what you would call the reality-based institutions. The reality-based institutions like journalists, for example, or maybe it's the CDC or World Health Organization. If you read Yashka, they're very concerned that they've been captured by critical social justice ideology and are no longer reliable. In other words, they're no longer actually reality-based institutions in that way. And you seem to be more optimistic or resist that characterization. Can you talk about that?
Well, I characterize myself as hopeful, not quite optimistic, because everything depends on the liberal side getting its act together. Developing first the confidence, and then second, the organizational skills to defend what we stand for. So far, we were taken by surprise, right? These internet technologies like social media are brand new and turned out to be much better for trolling and canceling and disinformation initially. Those people figured it out long before we did. So they took us by surprise. And they've also had the advantage of having this safe harbor in academia for a lot of illiberal ideas for a long time. But I also point out, let's not forget the incredible depth of institutional skill and knowledge that's built into the reality-based community. We're talking here about the courts, about mainstream media, about the academic world. There are still deep, deep reserves of integrity and skill and knowledge. These are still the only institutions that can, for example, put a COVID vaccine in my arm in less than a year, and really, develop one, design one in basically a weekend. No one else can do that. And we're now seeing some pushback from within those institutions. I mentioned earlier, this was a surprise attack, right? Think of this as Pearl Harbor or 9/11 or ISIS sweeping through Iraq. When only one side is organized and has confidence and has mobilized, then you're going to expect the other side to lose. But I'm seeing groups like JILV pop up, not the only one. Counterweight, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, the Academic Freedom Alliance, Princetonians for Free Speech. They keep coming. And the older institutions like the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education are mounting new initiatives. So our side is only just now starting to get suited up and get into the game. And then it will be a contest. And that's what I think the doomsayers miss. But then if you want to be complacent, I urge you not to do that, because this is a really tough fight. These illiberal people and organizations that we're going up against here, they are well organized, they are well funded, they are deploying very psychologically sophisticated tools against liberals, and tools that were used by Lenin, successfully, by Hitler successfully, by Putin and Trump today successfully. So it's not that we win automatically. It's that if we win if we get our act together.
So I had this thesis that one of the reasons why this is, and I'm talking here primarily about what's happening on the left, is such a potent force, is that it really has this alternative epistemology to liberalism, which is, you could say, standpoint epistemology. And standpoint epistemology is an act of deference. It demands deference on the part of its adherents. That, in a way, I worry that institutions that have agreed to sort of the critical social justice proposition have signed on the dotted line to people within their organizations, sometimes young people, sometimes coalitions of people of color, or others that they feel a great deal of loyalty to. And so a newspaper like the New York Times might say, look, yes, we are going to make sure that we look at our news through a racial justice and equity lens. And once they do that, there is sort of no end to the demands that they're facing in how they cover the news and who they promote and how they deal with controversies that emerge. And that makes it very difficult for these institutions to then extricate themselves from this situation. Am I wrong about that?
You're not necessarily wrong, but we'll see. When institutions start going down the road of pure subjectivism, which quickly becomes cultism, right? That means there's only one point of view, and the leadership will tell you what it is, or the governing faction will tell you what it is. They lose touch with reality. They become untrustworthy to their readers if they're the New York Times. They become bad places to work if you're a skilled and independent-minded reporter, which any good reporter is. I know people at the New York Times, and I can tell you that there was some unhappiness in the ranks about the situation that you're talking about. It is not everyone at the New York Times. And that's why I keep saying again and again, there are tons and tons of liberal and pluralistic-minded people out there, and they are in these institutions. Frequently, they have not had the organizational standing and backing to band together and push back. And one reason for that is who wants to be called a racist, right? Most of these folks are pluralists, but they're progressives, and they don't want to be on the wrong side of race. But something's changed recently, David, which adds an interesting new note, which is in the past 2 or 3 years, progressives, people on the left, have realized that they too are targets and victims of canceling, that being politically correct gives you no cover at all. Actually, David Shore, a socialist analyst of politics, was simply tweeted out a perfectly precise summary of an academic report and was fired the next day after some people ganged up on him. Being on the left gave him no protection at all. What these illiberal forces are out there to do is not create safe harbors for people who stay within certain boundaries. It's to put landmines everywhere. So everybody is chilled. So no one knows what it's safe to say. That's why this is information warfare. It's about disrupting the whole environment so that no one knows what they can say anymore. And I can tell you the Academy has a lot of students now, and increasingly a number of progressive professors who've had it with that. They can't teach the way they want to teach. They can't do the research that they want to do. Students are saying they want, including progressive students, are saying they want a better environment. The saddest interview I had in my book was with a student, I think a senior at a famous liberal arts college. And I asked how she felt about intellectual diversity in her education. And she said she really wished she had been exposed to more conservative views, but she said, at least I was exposed to a wide range of progressive views. Now, that's not education, right? But students are tumbling to that. They're telling surveyors, pollsters that they want more. So I think progressives are starting to figure out that these illiberal movements are not about progressive values. Progressive values include intellectual diversity and pluralism. These people who are waging information warfare are in business for themselves. As progressives tumble to that, I think it becomes easier to assemble a coalition from the center right to the center left and even on into the left for free speech and for the discipline of facts. Now, again, I'm not saying it happens automatically by itself. We have to make it happen, but that's why you're here.
We're going to do our best. One of the things I've been criticized about having left sort of the progressive Jewish world from really prominent voices within the Jewish community, is that I had left a position which involved privilege. I had an organization, a platform, and now I'm complaining about having my speech curtailed by supposedly powerful forces. And they see it as a kind of whining. And it seems to me, I mean, I see this as a way of sort of silencing the argument I'm trying to make. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this. It strikes me as sort of an extension of cancel culture. It's not. I'm not afraid of being canceled. In some ways, I'm canceled. I mean, I'm no longer in the role that I was, and I'm now fighting a different battle. But have you heard this kind of logic being used, and what's your take on it?
Oh, sure. I've heard it all the time. And I think actually there's something to it. So back again to this key concept. It's the underlying concept of the whole book of information warfare, of epistemic warfare. These people, for the most part, don't have physical weapons. They can't physically hurt you. And they're a minority in society. The truly woke in America, the left wing of the progressive movement, that's the energy behind what you're worried about. The More in Common survey, probably the best survey to date, found that that's 8% of the population. And even in liberal arts college campuses, the really hardcore, the people who are doing the silencing, demanding the investigations, those are minorities. So the question becomes, how is it that these, by minorities, I don't mean ethnic, I mean factions, numerical minorities. How do numerical minorities dominate majorities, much larger groups in this way? Well, first, they out-organize. And second, they have a lot of confidence in what they're talking about. They have tested lines, which they can use again and again. But the biggest thing they have going for them is when people on our side of the debate kind of shuffle around and mumble, put our heads down and say, well, I'm going to graduate in 2 years. I don't really want to be called a racist, so I'm not going to stand up to this. Or when people who are liberals see pressure being put on employers to fire someone like David Shore, and we don't demand of those same employer, what the heck are you doing? What you're doing is illiberal. It's betraying your employees. It's, so there should be counteractions, right? So I kind of think, yeah, our side needs to stop explaining that we're being silenced and stop being silenced. They cannot force us to shut up. When you get to chapter 8 of the book, you'll see that I use the term snowflakes, but not for college students on the left who are trying to speech police. I use it for the tenured faculty members who have the safest jobs in the world, who don't stand up when they know that what's going on in a faculty meeting isn't right. We need to change that, and that's on us.
Yeah. So speaking of counteractions, we see now that there's this backlash that's certainly materializing on the far right of the political spectrum around CRT and K through 12 and so forth. And I think it might have started with liberals like me and you who were concerned about how ideologies were indoctrinating kids, but it's now being taken over by a group of people who are a little less subtle, a little less nuanced. Perhaps they're using critical race theory in an overly comprehensive way, and they're, and that's fueling this really excruciating ideological debate. I've been now attacked by people for joining forces with these right-wing factions, even though I haven't done anything with any right-wing faction, but being on the same side as them. And they're saying, why aren't you really dealing with the illiberalism coming from your right flank rather than the indoctrination, or what you perceive as indoctrination on the left? What do you make of that? What do you think truly liberal organizations who are trying to restore liberalism ought to do if they're worried about some people on the right flank going overboard?
I think they should call it out illiberalism and anti-pluralism wherever they see them. I was very pleased to see, for example, that the Academic Freedom Alliance, that's Keith Whittington's group out of Princeton, put out a statement saying that they do not support the illiberal versions of critical race theory and its offshoots, but also that they equally condemn the invasions of academic freedom that are now going on in the name of stopping critical race theory, where you got legislatures telling professors what they can teach, probably unconstitutional, but certainly anti-scientific. Mm-hmm. So, this is the fate of the liberal, small l liberal, in society since the beginning of liberalism in the time of Locke. Enemies, adversaries, let's say. I have no enemies, only people who aren't yet friends, but adversaries on the left, adversaries on the right. And these values we're trying to project, the open society with all of its uncertainty and all of its hiccups and bumps and all of its many duties to trust these big, vast systems like markets and science and democracy. This puts a heavy burden on people, and it's never intuitive. It's just much more intuitive for me to believe I'm right and put you in jail for disagreeing. That's kind of how we're wired. So our destiny as liberals is to get up every morning for the rest of time and make our arguments from scratch. And our children and grandchildren and their children and grandchildren will have to do the same thing. And we just need to be cheerful about it, because actually liberalism, in the big sweep of history, it's doing amazingly well.
So I'm going to ask for your strategic advice for a second. One of the things that I've been struggling with is how to talk about these issues. There, on the one hand, we have, in my view at least, two disparate target audiences. There are the people who probably secretly already agree with us but are afraid to speak out. Those are the people we want to borrow a term from the gay rights movement, come out of the closet. The second group are fence sitters who are struggling with these issues. They may be uncomfortable with some of what they hear from the far left, and sympathetic to some of the arguments from liberalism, but they haven't made up their minds yet. And I find in trying to activate our potential base, I might be alienating the fence sitters, and I'm not sure what to do and how to sequence that, or how to thread the needle between those different target audiences. Do you have a sense of that?
Well, it's of course complicated, as politics always is, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I learned from my 17 years in the trenches fighting for same-sex marriage, or maybe it was 20 years, 1995 to 2015. So when I started on that cause in 1995, my father warned me not to touch it. Because he said it would destroy my reputation as a journalist, because the idea of men marrying men, women marrying women was so ludicrous, so impossible, so unlikely ever to happen that people would think I was a nut job. And in 1995, that seemed very plausible. And then we lost and we lost and we lost. In 2004, you may recall there were ballot initiatives in many states against same-sex marriage and even against civil unions. We lost all of them. I think at one point we lost 31 out of a possible 30 because Arizona voted twice. Don't hold me to that. So we lost and we lost and we lost. And then, wait a minute, we won. So how does that happen? Well, one thing is we had nowhere else to go. We're stuck in America. We need to get married. So we couldn't go away, so we didn't go away. Another thing that at least I did, which I think is probably more generally applicable, is it's always tempting to pitch our arguments to the most fierce and outlandish people on the other side. These are the people who are attacking you, who are tweeting at you, or calling you a fascist, or whatever they're calling you. And it always seems to pay. You can raise money off what the extremists on the other side are saying about you, and then sounding equally extreme. But something you just said is super important, which is don't pitch your arguments to the most extreme person on the other side. Pitch the arguments to that person who is silent. They're in the room. They're listening. They may not be talking, but they are listening. They are being influenced. They are looking for reason and rationality. They're looking for a tone that is loving, not hateful, and that is knowledgeable, not ignorant. So you're talking to them. So while the anti-marriage folks were busy talking to each other and screaming about the extremes of the gay far left, we were talking to these people in these communities saying, well, if you had a son or daughter who is gay, wouldn't you want that person to have the prospect of marriage? So talk to the middle, talk to the middle, talk to the middle, and do that in a way that just relies on calm but persistent, sound argumentation. This does not have immediate results. Sometimes for years it'll seem to have no results at all. But I say that this tactic often, it's a big bomb, but it's on a long fuse. You will be surprised how many people there will be who are out there who are either hovering or already leaning our direction, who just, they need the arguments, and they need to know we're not crazy, and they need to know that the society we want to build is a peaceful and loving society, better than the alternatives. They want to hear answers to their questions. Do that.
So let me just switch gears for a second. I was pleasantly surprised that you sort of touched on religion in the Constitution of Knowledge, and you talked about a Christian friend who has access to a different epistemic realm than you do. And I thought that was I think that's how you put it. Very beautiful. And I assumed, I guess wrongly, that you were part of the new atheist movement with Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and the like. But it seems like, even though you're a proud atheist, that you haven't defined yourself as such by those comments. How do you view?
Oh, I'm an atheist, and I was born canceled, David, because from about the age of 6, I knew that I could not believe in God. I knew that I could never marry a woman. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. And of course, I knew I was Jewish. And though I was secular, and Hebrew school was a disaster for me, I also knew that I was part of a community which had long preceded me and long followed me, and that frankly, when Hitler comes back, he's coming for me first. So I had no choice about any of these 3 things. So I understood all that. In my teens, I was a militant atheist. I thought, it's just stupid to believe in that crap. How childish. And then I was exposed to a man named Mark McIntosh in college roommate, now a distinguished theologian, amazing man. And through him and gradually others, I met a type of religious person who I realized was tuned into wavelengths that I didn't receive. And so I think being an atheist, at least of the kind I am, really unable to have faith. And I did try at one point in my teens. I think it's kind of like color blindness. I mean, I function perfectly well. I'm happy the way I am. There's significant advantages to being an outsider. But someone like Francis Collins, the director of the National Institutes of Health, who is one of the world's greatest scientists and also a deep believer, I think he has aspects to dimensions of life that I can't perceive. And he's obviously capable of having faith in the religious sphere and having the Constitution of Knowledge in the scientific sphere. He has both of these worlds. He has access to both. I only have access to one. So is there something wrong with me? No, I'm really happy. I actually wouldn't trade it in. There are advantages to being an outsider. But is faith like a shortcoming that needs to be healed? No, I really don't think it is. I think it's kind of a sixth sense that most people get that I didn't.
Is there any aspect of your Jewishness? I know Hebrew school was a turnoff. It was for me too, by the way. But is there any aspect of your Jewishness that helped put you where you are today, that helped you think the thoughts that you think today?
All of it, the whole bundle. The way I think, my sense of humor, and the knowledge that I would always be an outsider to the world. One of the things that's it's too bad is, you hear a lot of people on college campuses talk about how terrible it is to have the burden if you're a minority, of constantly explaining yourself. And I say to them, yeah, that is a burden, but it's also an incredible privilege to be an outsider. We're the first people. We're on the margins. We're never fully accepted. So we're the first to perceive injustice in many cases, because the majority are swimming in it, right? We're the vanguard of social change for the better over time. Think of African-American civil rights and women and gays and now transgender. And I think that's a privilege, not a shortcoming. So I forgot exactly what your question was. I think I'm in the ballpark, though.
Yeah, you're in the ballpark about your Jewishness and its influence.
Oh, so yeah, I mean, being Jewish is, it helps me, I think, to not be a member of the predominant club. And then there's also a Jewish way of thinking, all the jokes about it. the rabbi who's one villager says the answer is X. And the rabbi says, yes, that's right. And the other villager says the answer is Y. And the rabbi says, yes, that's right. And then the third villager says, Rabbi, they can't both be right. And the rabbi says, yes, that's right.
That's right.
That's how
Right.
we think. Jews are in a constant stream of dialogue, discourse, doubt, uncertainty, checking. So, yeah, deeply influenced. I embrace that influence.
Yeah, it's tragically what I'm worried about. Why I founded the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. I grew up with what I call debate culture, and I've tried to instill that with my kids and now my stepkids. Where on a Shabbat dinner, I'll raise an issue for discussion, and I'll be the devil's advocate and force them to sort of think through issues from different viewpoints and different approaches. And we have some great conversations. And I feel like that imparted critical thinking. And that was part of what it meant to be Jewish for me. And I feel like that is actually at stake right now in the current discourse, and why I feel so compelled to try to get it back to a place where we can talk about ideas again in a serious way.
Well, I completely support that, and bless you for doing that. There's always going to be pressures to shut down debate, because it's very inconvenient for the powers that be. And the work you're doing is just incredibly important to keep that ethos alive. And students welcome this. There's a movement now called debate-centered instruction, which is taking off. There's a Brookings book on it called Resolve, how debate can, I think, revitalize education and depolarize America. But this is about bringing debate-styled argumentation and discussion as a tool of classroom teaching. And it turns out students love this.
Sure.
It teaches them to see both sides of the argument because they might have to argue the other side. It gets them involved in dialogue and discourse. It's active. So debate tradition is a fantastic tool for liberalism and for pluralism, and it's getting some traction.
Right. I wasn't going to go here now. I had one final question, but I want to go back for 1 second because it's a thing I'm struggling with. So you have the whole CRT debate in schools, and you could say, okay, let's not use the word critical race theory. Maybe it is more of an arcane academic pursuit. But of course, there is a basic proposition that many are talking about, which is that systems of bias are shaping society. And I'm arguing, while I agree that that is sometimes true, maybe often true, it's not always true. And there are other ways to look at disparity besides a systems-based approach, that one can bring in other theoretical lenses and tools and ways of thinking, and that we should debate that idea, not try to impose it on students. It's not a settled question. Do you have a sense of that?
I completely agree. I think you just said it as well or better than I ever could have. I'm not deeply knowledgeable in critical race theory. I'm not sure it's even a single thing. It seems to have many different aspects and many different definitions. But when I encounter a new idea, I try to approach it not as how can I make this go away, but what can I learn from this? And I think there are things to be learned from critical race theory. But like all new theories, big sweeping new theories, Marxism, for example, Freudianism, it's got elements where it goes way overboard or where it's not falsifiable, or when it can easily shade into illiberalism in its applications. So what you just said is exactly right. As long as it's subjected to the same process of rigorous critical debate as any other view, we're fine. We'll find the good stuff in critical race theory, and it will become part of our knowledge base, and we will be better off for it. I know this because I'm gay. When until 1973, when I was 13, I was defined as mentally ill. That was science. We got rid of that by exposing it to debate and criticism. So the same thing will happen, but the trick is what you just said. It's the debate and criticism part. We can't hold any doctrine, no matter how appealing, whether it's your Christianity, your special creationism, whether it's QAnon, whether it's critical race theory, or for that matter, whether it's the theory of gravity, we can't hold it above debate and questioning, because then it turns into a religion.
Yeah. So one last question. About 15 or 20 years ago, you wrote an article about being an introvert. And it's funny when I've like looked you up on quotes from Jonathan Rauch, there's some great introvert quotes in that. I have a theory about that, but I first want to ask you, don't tell me the answer, but do you know what your Myers-Briggs is?
No, I think I do, but I don't really, because I've never really taken the test.
Okay, so I have a
think
guess.
I think I have a guess though.
I think you're an INTJ.
Correct. I think that's what I am too.
Yeah. Now, my wife is very into. She's an INTJ, a very rare type among women. It's actually the least common female type is an INTJ woman. And she's on an INT Facebook page with a lot of other INTJs. Now, the other INTJs that I've known are Helen Pluckrose, for example. I asked her, don't tell me what you are, I'll guess. And what my wife says, and she's extremely critical of woke ideology, she's a liberal, by the way, very liberal, but very critical, is that literally every single person on that Facebook group is very critical of woke ideology to a person. Some of them are liberal, some of them are a little center right, but they're all very critical. And I'm wondering if there's any possibility that there are certain personality types that might be associated with certain political ideologies or viewpoints, and if that's something that we should sort of explore more down the line.
Oh, you're way behind the times on this. There's a whole literature on personality types and belief, not just religious belief, but political belief. John Haidt's famous book, The Righteous Mind, talks about moral psychology and moral tastes and the way we're wired by our personalities to respond to different types of ideology. So yeah, there are huge personality influences. There's no question about it.
I read it, but I had forgotten that. So I have to go back and reread The Righteous Mind. Well, I really appreciate it. Good luck with the book. I hope it is a tremendous bestseller. Greg Lukianoff from Fire said, I want to make this book become a bestseller. So
I want that too. So I hope folks will check it out, buy it. It's called The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. The book is better than the movie. I promise you.
Right. It actually is a great book about epistemology. Who knew? But thank you so much for writing it.
Thank you.